Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Language change is our topic today in bilingualism, and in this lecture, we are talking about language change and its causes in the first part of this lecture. Language change is a variation over time in a language's features. It is studied in several subfields of linguistics like historical linguistics, social linguistics, and evolutionary linguistics. Some commentators use the label corruption to suggest that language change constitutes a degradation in the quality of a language, especially when the change originates from human error or is a prospectively discouraged usage. Because whenever there is a change, so this is not always or so often encouraged. So whenever there is a change in the standard language, is usually discouraged. So that's why some commentators, they call language change as a corruption in language. Anyway, this is one of the concepts, and modern linguistics typically does not support this concept that language change is corruption in language, because as per the modern linguistics, from scientific point of view, such innovations cannot be judged in terms of good or bad. John Lyons notes that any standard of evolution applied to language change must be based upon a recognition of the various functions a language is called upon to fulfill in the society which uses it. Language is always changing, and language changes across space and across social groups, and it also varies across time. Generation by generation, pronunciations evolve. New words are borrowed or invented, the meaning of old words drift, and morphology develops or decays. The rate of change varies, but whether the changes are faster or slower, they build up until the mother tongue becomes arbitrarily distant and different. After 1,000 years, the original and new languages will not be mutually intelligible, and after 10,000 years, the relationship will be essentially indistinguishable from chance relationships between historically unrelated languages. Now, in some languages which are historically not related to each other, but accidentally some relationships are found there, they are known as chance relationships, but after passage of 10,000 years time, so such relationships will essentially be indistinguishable when they will not be found between two languages which are historically not related to each other. So this is the function of language change. When language change is such a fact or an undeniable fact. In isolated subpopulations speaking the same language, most changes will not be shared. And as a result, such subgroups will drift apart linguistically and eventually will not be able to understand one another. due to language change. In the modern world, language change is often socially problematic. Long before divergent dialects lose mutual intelligibility completely, they begin to show difficulties and inefficiencies in communication, especially under noisy or stressful conditions. Also, as people observe language change, they usually react negatively, feeling that the language has gone downhill. And you never seem to hear older people commenting that the language of their children or grandchildren's generation has improved compared to the language of their own youth. Here is a puzzle. So language change is functionally disadvantageous because it hinders communication, and it is also negatively evaluated by socially dominant groups, the elder people. But anyway, it is a universal fact of human history that cannot be denied. So now we will see what are the causes of language change. I will just see here some important causes, but the causes are not limited to the discussion in this lecture. You may search for more causes and include in your assignment. So how and why does language change? There are different routes to language change. A language change or the changes can originate in language learning or through language contact or social differentiation and natural processes in usage. Language is transformed as it is transmitted from one generation to the next. Each individual must recreate a grammar and lexicon based on input received from parents, older siblings, and other members of the speech community. The experience of each individual is different, and the process of linguistic replication is imperfect, so that the result is variable across individuals. However, a bias in the learning process, for instance, towards regularization, will cause systematic drift generation by generation. So there will be a systematic drift or change generation by generation in the regularization process of language. In addition, random differences may spread and become fixed, especially in small populations. According to one view, children regularly learn the adult forms imperfectly, and the changed forms then turn into a new standard. Alternatively, imperfect learning occurs regularly in one part of society, such as an immigrant group, where the minority language forms a substratum, and the changed forms can ultimately influence majority usage. Speech communities tend to change their utterances to be as efficient and effective with as little effort as possible, while still reaching communicative goals. So this is one of the causes is economy. So what is economy? So this is it. The speech community tries to be as efficient as possible with as little effort as possible, And purposeful speaking therefore involves a trade-off costs and benefits. The principle of least effort results in phonetic reduction of speech forms. So there is reduction in pronunciation of speech forms. So this is economy. So they are economic in speaking or in language usage. So for example, we see here examples like vowel reduction, cluster reduction, lenition, and elision. So these are all examples of economy in language usage. When there is a change in language, in sound, and after passage of some time, it's widely accepted, and it becomes a regular sound change, and it may end up treated as a standard sound. For example, I mean, there is any sort of change, like there is a vowel reduction or cluster reduction or lenition or elision or any other sort of change. So after passage of some time, it may be accepted as standard form of sound. For example, going to, you see its pronunciation here, it's going to, and its changed form is gonna and Ghana. So we have two pronunciations of the reduced form of going to, Ghana and Ghana. So with examples of both vowel reduction, here we have examples of both vowel reduction. So here, for example, this O is reduced to A, shaw, and elision of NT into N. Instead of going to, so we use here N sound only, and this symbol, you see O and I, as you see here, going, OE is changed into A. So here we have the examples of vowel reduction and elision. So this is an example of economy in language use, in speaking or in sound. Expressiveness is another cause of language change. When common or overused language, it tends to lose its emotional or rhetorical intensity over time. So when language is overused, some words are overused, or they become so common, so they lose their emotional depth or over the passage of time. So therefore, new words and new constructions are continuously employed to revive that intensity. So that's the expressiveness, and this is one of the reasons or causes for language change. Natural processes in usage. Rapid or casual speech naturally produces processes such as assimilation, dissimulation, syncope, and apocope. Through repetition, particular cases may become conventionalized and therefore produced even in slower or more careful speech. Word meaning change in a similar way through conventionalization of processes like metaphor and metonymy. Some linguists distinguish between internal and external sources of language change, with internal sources of change being those that occur within a single linguistic community, and contact phenomena being the main examples of an external source change. Language contact. Words and constructions are borrowed from one language into another. Migration, conquest, and trade bring speakers of one language into contact with speakers of another language. Some individuals will become fully bilingual as children, while others learn a second language more or less well as adults. In such context situations, language often borrow words, sounds, constructions, and so on. Cultural environment. Cultural environment is also one of the causes of language change. As a culture evolves, new places, situations, and objects inevitably enter its language, whether or not the culture encounters different people. Geographic separation is another cause of language change. When people with one language move away from each other, the language will gradually diverge into separate dialects due to different experiences. And the people of one language, they move away, one goes to west and one goes to east, so their dialects will gradually become separate from each other due to their different experiences. Speech communities moving into a region with a new or more complex linguistic situation will influence and be influenced by language change. So they sometimes even end up with entirely new languages like pidgins and carols. Social prestige as another factor of language change. Language may not only change towards features that have more social prestige, the positive, but also away from ones with negative prestige. So the example of negative prestige is in the case of the loss of rhoticity in the British received pronunciation accent. And such movements, they can go back and forth, back and forth. Social groups adopt distinctive norms of dress, adornment, gesture, and so on. Language is part of the package. I mean, the same is the case with the language, and people show their distinction in by using language differently, distinctively from other people. Linguistic distinctiveness can be achieved through vocabulary, slang or jargon, pronunciation, like usually by exaggeration of some variants already available in the environment, and morphological processes and syntactic constructions. So they use language differently and distinctively, and this way also changes occur in the language. Okay, thank you very much. So that's all for first part. We talked about language change and its causes. In second part, we'll talk about types of language change. See you.